Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm your host, Quianna Canada. Welcome to the Quianna Canada Show. I hope you had a good week. I know that I'm trying to get through this week. Been having a lot of work to do in my studies, but that's a story for another time. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes these videos up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important. But we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, it does not mean that videos like this are not important. So, as an announcement, let me just, okay, can I, just a moment. Okay, I think I'm good. As an announcement, it's an announcement that I give in majority of my videos. Um, my- okay, let's see. So it's an announcement that I often give in a majority of my videos, and that announcement is on transnational repression. So, what is transnational repression? Well, essentially, what it is where countries they're reaching across their borders to silence the dissent of their citizens. They do this in a number of ways. Some of the hard tactics are incommunicado detention, enforced disappearances, extraordinary renditions, and some of the most frightening cases, it can be unalivement. But there are some soft tactics that states use to silence the dissent of their citizens or the dissent of foreign nationals that it dislikes, and that is uh, political, going into political repression, such as digital repression, online censorship, cyberbullying, cyber intimidation. And there is um, other modalities such as, and within these typologies, there's also proxy threats and not only that, but intimidation in the host country. Now, I might do a video on that later, but today I really want to focus on good news because there is a story that is coming out of the state where I'm from, Texas. And I think it's important sometimes to really focus on what people are doing good. Oftentimes, when we are looking at the news or there is a story coming across our news feed, what we see is negative news, negative news, negative news, negative stories, negative stories. And it can be draining, it can be depressing, it can be stressful, to say the least. But sometimes there is a ray of sunshine in all of these stories that we are having to shift through to find the positive stories. And so I think this is one. And so in um, these videos that I will be uploading, if you see a star that's going to be on the right hand corner, it's going to be a large star. That is an indication that this is a good story connected to an international human rights principle or a constitutional principle. So, as you can see, I'm not just a person that brings negative news. I also talk about good news when something comes across my feed and I'm very inspired by it. And ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about David Fleischer. He is a Jewish judge. He is coming out of Texas, the Lone Star State, and he is upholding the Constitution. He's doing the right thing. And oftentimes, ladies and gentlemen, judges like this don't get enough attention. However, I would argue that this judge has been getting a lot of media attention because he is doing the right thing. And I think that this is just a wonderful thing. And so I want to go ahead and get into a couple of the videos to kind of show you exactly how he is upholding the Constitution for Black Americans. And so I want to share my screen with you. And I think that we are ready. And so Here we go.
The suspicion we have is they begin to investigate what?
So
A criminal trespass.
they're called as a disturbance, and they saw him yelling, being aggressive, and then as he walked away, that's when they saw.
So the trespass investigation ceases because he's leaving. Yes or no?
It's not specified to be a trespass, Your Honor. It's specified just to be a disturbance.
That's what it is. Okay, but it's a trespass that they're investigating a trespass, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, isn't that what it is?
He attempted to leave, but once the officers arrived, so they would still need to investigate to determine if the trespass even occurred, to determine,
He's leaving.
He's walking.
He's leaving, right? It's like, here, let me come and mess with you more.
That would only.
Right? So it's like adding fuel to a fire. I'm going to find no.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, as we know, when it comes to trespass, and I've actually spoke about trespass before on my podcast. So as we know, when it comes to trespass, what often happens is that if you are on someone's property, or let's say, for instance, you go to a convenience store and they ask you to leave and you say, I don't want to leave, right? But then you decide that you do want to leave and you're leaving from the property. Well, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? There is no trespass to come to you because you have already left the property. Now, if you stay on the property when the police officers come, then you can be trespassed. But law enforcement cannot trespass you if you have already left the property. And so in this particular case, you can see that the man has already left the property, whatever that property was. He wasn't bothering anybody. He wasn't committing a crime. And so there was no reason for him to be arrested. Let's go ahead and continue. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Okay, here we are.
Probable cause.
You understand?
Mr. Jones, be careful, man. We have enough drama in this life, don't we?
Yeah.
You don't like to wear orange, do you? Be careful where you go. Be careful what you do.
Sir.
Everyone's always out to get you, man. Don't let them.
The judge.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, like the judge in the case was fair, and he is upholding the Constitution, and that is what we need. Is we need judges to uphold the Constitution, not for everybody. And I believe that this judge is doing that. He is upholding the Constitution for everybody, and this is what is very important and necessary in a democratic society. And let's go to another video because there is another one. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and let's go.
Good morning, Mr. McLean. Sir, you're charged with interference with the duties of a public servant. You're facing up to 6 months in jail and/or a $2,000 fine. We're going to do probable cause. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can or will be used against you. You have the right to have an attorney present. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you.
Yes, sir. An officer initiated a traffic stop in Harris County, Texas, after observing the defendant exceed a speed limit of 45 miles per hour and make unsafe lane changes. The defendant did not have his driver's license, but told the officer his name and date of birth. While the officer was running the defendant's name, he observed the defendant exit his vehicle, and the officer told the defendant to get back inside the vehicle. And the defendant responded, "Do I have to?" The officer exited the vehicle and attempted to detain the defendant. The defendant tensed up and locked his arms.
Everything is conclusory. What has he done wrong? What?
It was the initial lane changes, unsafe lane changes, and the exceeding the speed limit that prompted the stop. And then at that point, he was just
Stop. How exceeding speed limit? How fast was he going? I mean,
I spoke to the officer this morning, who told me that he was pacing the defendant at 54 miles per hour.
okay, in a what?
I'm sorry?
In a what? I mean, if it's on 610, he's fine, right? And then he's interference duties.
Okay, can you see that, ladies and gentlemen? So basically, the Judge Fleischer asks, like, what was he? He was doing 54 and what? And I think on 610, you can do 60 miles an hour. And so, okay, why was he even stopped? Is the question, right? And so you can see how like there's an injustice already here. Let's continue. Oh, and I wanted to mention. Oh no, I'll mention that later. Hold on.
What is he interfering with? What did he
It
do
was-
wrong?
I think it was after the stop was initiated, the officer was running the plates. The defendant stepped out of his vehicle. The officer told him to get back in the vehicle. The defendant said, "Do I have to?" The officer told me that
And that's the basis of arrest?
See how.
Can I speak,
Your Honor.
please?
Don't. Are you losing?
Okay, so in this part, ladies and gentlemen, some people may take umbrage with Judge Fleischer talking to him, saying, "Are you losing that way?" Then some people, but I think that what the judge is doing is protecting his Fifth Amendment right to against self-incrimination. Incrimination. So as you can see, like it appears as if this person is standing before the court without legal counsel, and so the judge recognizes that in this particular case. And of course, the duty of the judiciary is to uphold the Constitution and to interpret the law. And so, by I think understanding that he has a person, an accused person before him that is without legal representation, the most preferable thing to do is really to aid that person and to protect their constitutional rights. And I think that that is what is happening in this particular case. And so the judge did not allow him to speak because, one, he wasn't losing in the case. So there was no reason for him to give any testimony. And to any testimony that he gave or could give um, could possibly incriminate him. And so why incriminate yourself when you're already winning the case, right? And I think that that was the perspective of the judge here. Let's continue.
No, sir.
Okay.
And Your Honor, furthermore, as he was attempting to detain him, he locked his arms and tensed up. So as he was attempting to detain him, following that incident of him telling him to get back in the vehicle. And it was
That's
that,
the basis for arrest.
it was just a temporary
Walking while black?
detention. He was just attempting to detain him while he was trying to investigate.
And see, the judge recognizes that there is no legal basis for an arrest, that what it appears is that this particular incident seems to be racialized. And so it could be a case of racial profiling. And I think that the Judge Fleischer rightfully identifies that in this case. Let's continue.
What's he doing wrong?
He had
What's he doing wrong?
65.
No, I don't think so. To find no probable cause. No, it's just, he gets out of the car and then it just the virtue of fact him getting out in the car is interfering with the duties. Really? No, just when you get into, just be careful out there, man.
Yes, sir.
Life is hard as it is.
Yes, sir.
When you get into, gotta be careful, man.
Yes, sir.
People always have to get you. Be nice. It's not hard.
I was being
Things will go well for you,
Too.
Look, I got it. I'm with you, okay? Just hang tight with me for a second, okay? All right.
The judge threw out.
And so you can see, ladies and gentlemen, how the judge has seen that there was really no probable cause in this case. And just because a person exits their vehicle doesn't mean that they're interfering with the duties of law enforcement. You can get out of the car, and oftentimes we know that that is a request that is made by law enforcement, is that the person exit their vehicle and not remain in their vehicle. And so the fact that this was a common request from law enforcement, and yet in this particular case, among others, we have citizens that are being hauled off to jail because they are actually, doing what law enforcement would ordinarily ask of them, is just quite unfortunate, isn't it? But to reiterate, what's important about this case is that you have a judge and he is connected to human, or I I guess I will say he's connected to the Constitution. And I think I watched an interview of Judge Fleischer's, and he spoke at length about why it's very important to protect the Constitution. And I believe him. I believe that this is something that he is trying to do. And so um, I wanted to shine a spotlight on this particular judge because of his work in the community and upholding the Constitution. To reiterate, I know that a lot of times, when I'm doing stories, I'm actually talking about something that has been negative and something that has happened that I need to say, okay, well, the judge should have did this, or police officers should have did this, or police officers should not have done that. But in this case, the judge is doing the right thing, and that's the kind of judges that we need in society. And so, to reiterate, you know, several times over, this Jewish judge is magnificent. He is amazing. He is standing in solidarity with, those that are uh, vulnerable in the criminal justice system. He is an arbiter of the law who is making attempts to actually protect it and to be fair and to be honest and to be transparent. And that's what we need. I want to do some reading about social um, psychology. And I think that the readings that I'm going to do is going to help us explain why I think Judge Fletcher is intervening in the way that he does. And now, ladies and gentlemen, so before I get into this reading, it's important to understand that what I'm going to be talking about is race. And so it's a disclaimer. So if you're very sensitive about hearing conversations about race, if these conversations make you uncomfortable, this may not be a video that you would want to continue to watch, although there's not going to be like any racially charged language, nor is there going to be any incitement to hate, or nor is there going to be any incitement to violence. But it is going to be a conversation from a sociological perspective about race. And with saying that, I want to also acknowledge that not all persons are monolith. So, for example, not all groups are monolithic. Not every group thinks alike. And so I am mindful of that. And um, I just want to, I was reading today and I found some interesting information. Then I thought about this case. And then I said, okay, well, I can tie it to this case because this information seems so interesting. So studies have found that, and so before I get into this point, most Jewish people, and I'm not saying all, but most Jewish people don't identify themselves as white. And some do, so that cannot be denied, but some don't. Some identify themselves as Jewish and believe that they are a distinct racial group, from what I understand. And so, why did Judge Fletcher decide to help these Black men in his court? Helping out groups. Essentially, these are out groups, but are they? Now, I think that according to the research that I've done, I think that one could argue that Judge Fletcher sees himself as part of a similar group to Black Americans, I guess, in history. So, for example, as we know, um, Black Americans went through the transatlantic slave trade, and that was a very horrific history and time. And then we had the Jewish people who went through the Holocaust, which was that was also a very horrific time in history. And so studies find that white participants showed in-group favoritism while others find no differences. So they were doing a study and they showed that, like, when it came to helping others, so traditionally, and we're not talking about Jewish people, but like traditionally white Americans or white people would traditionally help other people that were white. Whereas the study found that people who were like Black or other minorities would actually um, help other people as well. So not just their in group, but also help people in the out group. So it said extensive literature that uses helping as a non-reactive measure of prejudice found some studies continue to find that white participants showed in-group favoritism while others find no differences or even out-group favoritism. And so they went on to say that they argue that white people are less likely to help Black people in situations where failure to help can clearly be attributed to something other than race, or in situations of high emergency where interventions are potentially very costly. That's interesting, right? So let me read that again. They argue that white people are less likely to help Black people in situations where failure to help can clearly be attributed in something other than race, or in situations of high emergency where interventions are potentially very costly. And so you may say, well, Quianna, well, what does that have to do with Judge Fleischer? Like, is he white or is he not white? And why did he help this out group, right? And so I want to give you an example of why I think that he helped. And this is like a strong example of why I think that Judge Fletcher helped uphold the Constitution, whereas he wasn't prejudiced in this particular case, or excuse me, in these cases. So, take, for example, the work of Reicher and colleagues of Holocaust rescue, in particular, the rescue of Bulgarian Jews. Reicher, Cassidy, Wolpert, and Hopkins and Levin showed that, unlike most countries in Europe under the influence of the Nazis during the Second World War, Bulgaria managed to resist German demands to deport Jews from the concentration camps. And so, sorry, I'm like whispering because like I'm in the library. So I'll try and read that again. So the work of Reicher and colleagues on Holocaust rescue, in particular the rescue of Bulgarian Jews, Reicher, Cassidy, Wolpert, Hopkins, and Levin show that, unlike most countries in Europe under the influence of the Nazis during the Second World War, Bulgaria managed to resist German demands to deport Jews to concentration camps. Reicher et al. And analyzed key documents, including political speeches, open letters, and official statements from influential people and organizations, including politicians, lawyers, and churches. By conducting a systematic qualitative analysis of the ways of arguments were constructed and deployed in the text, they showed that the Bulgarian political elite based their resistance to German demands on two strategies. Okay, so there's two strategies that they used. And the two strategies were, the first strategy was to argue that Jews were Bulgarian, and thus to deport a Jew was to deport a Bulgarian. They termed this an in-group inclusion strategy, and it could be achieved because the nature of Bulgarian identity was constructed in civic rather than racial terms. So you can see, right? So the argument was, hey, the Jews are also Bulgarian. And so why are you deporting a Bulgarian? This is a civic duty not to do this. It's not a racial duty, it's a civic duty not to do it. And so that was the first reason, right? And then the second strategy was to argue that it violated the values of Bulgarian identity to allow Jews to be deported. Reicher et al. Termed this an in-group norm strategy. The argument here was that it was fundamentally un-Bulgarian to allow such a fate to befall any group, and so to stand back and allow the deportation to happen would be a threat to the core values of the group. Ladies and gentlemen, so do you see, like, I think what is being argued here, and I think this is where essentially is where a group, maybe an in group, is identifying with an out group. And so the out group is saying, hey, I'm going to give you a helping hand because, there's similarities there. And so I see myself in you, I see you and me, and thus I'm going to reach out this helping hand. And so, of course, what the Bulgarians did with the Jews is they said, hey, don't deport them because they're essentially Bulgarian. And they knew that if they deported them to Germany, that of course they would face, something very horrific. And so how do we apply that to today, right? In the case, in these cases that we're seeing with Judge Fleischer. Well, Judge Fleischer understands that the criminal justice system in the United States is unfair and that there is prejudice and bias that is enshrined within these institutions. And so one way to lessen the impact of that bias is to, sit before these institutions, and when you recognize it, to speak out against it. And you've seen that he did that in two occasions. Like he spoke out very critically to these prosecutors who didn't care at all whether or not they were ruining a person's life. They didn't care. They didn't care that there was no probable cause. They didn't care that the law, that the Constitution is not supporting these arguments that they're putting before the court. Again, in one case, the gentleman was driving 45, and I think he was driving 45 in like a 50 or a 55. Excuse me, 54 or in a 60 or 65. And what's illegal about that? And so the prosecutor, going along with this is very corrupt. And so the judge recognizes that, okay, this person is already vulnerable to institutional racism and systemic racism. And so because there's a person before me that is vulnerable to these institutions and these people that are interpreting the law and essentially could, I guess in this case, maybe this person would be charged with a misdemeanor or an offense, but yes, still that would go on that person's record. But the most important thing is that there was no crime committed. And so let's just imagine that Judge Fleischer was not sitting on the bench and that there was another judge that was sitting there, and this other judge would be like, okay, well, guilty. That's a miscarriage of justice. And so going back to our case study with Bulgaria, so the Bulgaria seeing that there was going to be an injustice there with the Jewish people, and the Bulgarian people said, no, 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 no. We're not going to deport any Jews to Germany to suffer this horrific fate. We're going to, there is an identification there, and we're going to protect them and make sure that we have a duty, a civic duty to do that. And so that I think that that is what is happening in this case, that there is a civic duty to uphold the Constitution. And I think that this is what all judges in the United States should be doing. And it's unfortunate that all judges are not doing this. God. But what's good about this case, to reiterate, is that we have a judge who is upholding the law. And we have a judge that is not throwing any persons under the bus. And I think that Judge Fletcher, so reading that story about Bulgaria and the Jews, I think that the, the the Jewish identity of Judge Fletcher, I think that that is something that he resonates with, right? And I think he is connected to his history and understands that there is persecution that happens and that there is people that are still vulnerable to discriminatory processes in the criminal justice system. And so understanding his history and the history of Black Americans, what he chose to do is to protect those. So there were, of course, 2 Black Americans, but I'm pretty sure there were countless others that he chose to protect their constitutional rights. And that is what's supposed to be happening, right? That is what these judges are supposed to be doing. I also want to read a study which I found very interesting. And so this kind of ties into why people choose to help and why people choose not to help, right? And so it's the impact of social identity on emergency helping. This research uses football fans to study the effect of social identity on helping behavior in real life emergencies. The paper explores the hypothesis that bystanders are more likely to help victims of an emergency when the victims are seen as fellow in-group members. So remember what I was saying, like sometimes when there are judges before the court, they often don't help Black Americans because Black Americans are not seen as the in-group. Of course, the prosecutors are. However, the paper also acknowledges that group boundaries are not fixed. It seeks to demonstrate that by changing the way people think about their own social identity, we can extend the boundaries of the in-group. By extending the boundaries of the in-group, it becomes possible to increase the range of people who are helped. Okay, so I want to go to these experiments. So 2 experiments were conducted. Manchester United football fans were recruited to take part in both experiments. In study 1, they were primed to study and to think about themselves in terms of their Manchester United social identity. However, in study 2, they were primed to think about themselves in terms of more inclusive social identity as a football fan rather than a Manchester United fan. In both experiments, participants were exposed to an accident. While they were walking across the university campus, a stranger came along jogging. They tripped and fell and appeared to be hurt. The stranger was sometimes wearing a Manchester United football shirt and at other times a Liverpool football t-shirt, and sometimes an ordinary unbranded sports shirt. It was predicted that when Manchester United identity was salient, participants would help the stranger wearing a Manchester United t-shirt more often than when the stranger wore a Liverpool shirt. So you can kind of see, right? Like, interestingly, like they were in this study group where they were so going on further, you can kind of see, well, I'll go into this, but they were watching like videos of Manchester. And of course, they were watching these videos and watching images and stuff, and then you have a person that comes before them that is wearing a Liverpool t-shirt, and they're less likely to help them. Whereas if the person is wearing a Manchester t-shirt, they're like, yeah, I'll help this person. So the participants were, so there was 35 participants, and it was a group of, I think, male participants between 18 and 21. And there were also 29 male Manchester United fans ages 18 to 21 in this study. So you had like these two different groups. And so in both studies, participants came to the psychology department of English University and were placed in a small cubicle. So this is the procedure. In study one, they completed a questionnaire and wrote an essay about how much they loved being a Manchester United fan. In study two, they completed a questionnaire and wrote an essay about how much they loved being a football fan. After this first stage, they left the cubicles and were asked to walk on their own to another building to watch a video about football fans. While they were walking, an incident was staged in front of them. A Confederate, who was a stranger to the participants, came running along, tripped, fell, and cried out of pain while while holding his ankle. The Confederate was sometimes wearing a Manchester United shirt and at other times wearing a Liverpool FC shirt. And sometimes they were just wearing an ordinary shirt. And so you can kind of see like, okay, well, when the person, if you're watching like these videos of Manchester and you're writing an essay about how much you love Manchester and you love being a football fan, and this person runs across you and they trip and fall and they're wearing a Manchester shirt, you're more likely to help them than the person who trips and falls and is wearing the Liverpool shirt. So the results confirm the hypotheses that people are more likely to help strangers when they see some signs of common group membership in the person in need. However, the study also shows that group boundaries are not fixed, and by getting people to think about themselves in terms of more inclusive social identities, we can increase the range of people who are being helped. Further, the findings are particularly interesting because Manchester United and Liverpool fans have a strong historical rivalry. The rivalry has been known to result and sometimes in in-group violence. And yet, simply by changing the level at which people identify Manchester United fans can be encouraged to extend a helping hand to those towards they might otherwise feel antagonistic. This suggests that a way to increase feelings of responsibility for the welfare of others is to promote social identities that are inclusive as possible. So I loved reading that. I thought that was a very interesting study that was performed. I'll link this study in the description if you are interested in reading about it and like learning more about it. But I thought it was very interesting. And so why I brought this study up and to reiterate is that I think that Judge Fletcher saw these two men as part of a common group identity. And so he wanted to help them because, of course, probably his shared history of persecution. And oftentimes we understand that if a group, an in-group, or if a community does not have a shared history of persecution, they are less likely to help the person in need. And so I thought that this was a very interesting story interesting study that was published in a book that I'm reading. And so, yeah, what do you think? Do you think that Judge Fletcher made the right choice? Do you think that we need more judges like Judge Fletcher across the globe? Do you think that we can do more to help people that are in need? Do you think that we can help people even though they're in the out group? And what does it say about us when we don't help people because they're not in the in group? These are all questions that I want to know. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.